for the sake of the video. Hello, good evening, welcome to Aro Ling Cardiff. Tonight, Ngakma Nor'dzin will be telling us an interesting story from the life of Dza Patrul.
So just to repeat something that Ngakpa said last week, just as an introduction to these, that Dza Patrul Rinpoche lived in 1808 to 1887, and he was renowned as a great teacher, but as somebody who didn't make a show of being a teacher, that he would wander around from place to place, just dressed almost like a beggar, and only people who recognized him for what he was realized that he was a great teacher. Now, in this particular story, he's in an area of Eastern Tibet called Dza Patrul, which is in fact his birthplace, the area of Tibet in which he was born, which is why his name begins with Dza Patrul Rinpoche. The Dza indicates that he came from this area. Also mentioned in this story is one of his main disciples, who is called Ngakpa. Now, this story comes with a little bit of a health warning. I'm sure, as I think it's only our students here this evening, but so this is for the, oh, Sam's here. Hello, Sam. So this is for the video, really, that in this story, Dza Patrul Rinpoche is extremely rude, and he talks about monastic homosexuality. And I'll just read a footnote from the book that Rinpoche says about this. Both Kunzang Dorje Rinpoche and Shimi Rigsin Rinpoche had told me that homosexual pedophilia was common in Tibetan monasteries. So these references were not merely for shock value. This was common knowledge. Both lamas also had high praise for worthy monastic practitioners and for the institution itself when it was correctly maintained. So if you have some sensitivity about hearing about buggery, then I would suggest you stop watching this from now on if you're watching the video. So this story is called Just As You Are. And it launches, this chapter launches straight into the story. Patrul was staying in Dza Patrul, minding his own business and doing whatever needed to be done, when he received a visitor. Now, Patrul had seen enough monks to last him a while, and at that time, he was spending some quiet time with Ngakpa and a few other yogis. It just so happened at that particular time that Tertan Chogya Lingpa was having some difficulty with one of his main disciples. This was a monk by the name of Rinchen Targye. Now, this monk was a Kempo, a scholar, and a punctilious ecclesiastic into the bargain. He kept the monastic rules with precision, but had a tight mind. Chogya Lingpa had tried various approaches with him, but couldn't seem to shift him in terms of spiritual practice. The man was suffocating in the tension of his own moral purity. Now, Chogya Lingpa knew that Patrul didn't have much time for institutionalized monks in general, and this type of monk in particular. He knew that this was the sort of ecclesiastical dignitary who'd not immediately get a warm and affectionate reception from Patrul, so he wrote a letter. Patrul, old friend, I've got this stick-up-the-arse disciple who's as proud as a cockerel about being a monk. but seems hell-bent on mediocrity. If you can do something with him, I'd be most obliged. He's a good fellow in many ways and works hard, but he's a bit given to supercilious sanctimoniousness and assiduous puritanism. I can't seem to flush the stuff out of him, etc., etc., etc. The letter discussed a few details, exchanged a little news, and signed itself off in a cordial manner. When Chogyam Lingpa had finished the letter, he appended his seal and handed it to Rinchen Targye. Here, my boy, take this to Dza Patrul Rinpoche. It's about time you hightailed it to Golok and got some teachings and transmissions from him. But don't come back before you've received everything you need to receive, you hear? Rinchen Targye made prostrations to his teacher, took the letter, and made his way to Brigand country. Take care you're not buggered on the way, young fella. Some huge fat monk might like the look of you and decide to break your vows for you. Chogyam Lingpa called after him, but this didn't manage to alter Rinchen Targye's countenance. He was, as usual, frozen with solemnity. He set out for Golok with a party of attendants and finally reached Dza Patrul's place in Dza Chuka. When Patrul saw him coming, he called out to Nyurshul, "Hey, Nyurshul, a prince of pederasty has come to see us." Nyurshul looked anxiously to see who deserved such an appellation from Patrul. He could only see a party of monks on horseback. They were dressed in the usual regalia. Monastic types of a certain hauteur like to turn up at monasteries in all pomp and plumage. "Where is the prince?" asked Nyurshul in some perplexity. "There, Nyurshul, that pox-ridden parrot with the high-crested hat," Patrul replied, and pointed to the head lama in the party of monks. Sure enough, there was one of the monastic big shots, whom his teacher characteristically held in low esteem. "Show the insufferable blackguard in, if you will, Nyurshul. Looks as if he's coming our way, like it or not." Patrul muttered in a derisive tone, "I'll not be welcoming him out there, and that's for sure. I'll be in my room if he wants anything from me." Nyurshul waited for the visiting party to arrive and welcomed Rinchen Targye with all due respect. "Dza Patrul Rinpoche will see you if there is anything you want from him." Rinchen Targye asked him if he would kindly present a letter to Patrul from Tertan Chogyam Lingpa. Nyurshul took it with all due haste to his teacher. "Yeah, it's just as I thought," grumbled Patrul. "A prince of pederasty." Nyurshul knew that his teacher was not keen on monks, but this one had come with a letter from Tertan Chogyam Lingpa himself. Surely this was a person worthy of respect and the very best treatment. No, maybe the very best treatment, but respect was not going to be Patrul's way of working. "Why'd you call him a prince of pederasty? Take a look at this, Nyurshul, my lad." He passed the letter over. Nyurshul was very surprised indeed. "Show the bumptious little bounder in, if you will," Patrul yawned. And so it was that Rinchen Targye entered the illustrious presence of Patrul. He made his formal prostrations and sat before the renowned Lama. "What do you want of me then, king of pederasty? There are no young monks to bugger here. If you're looking for a nice firm pair of buttocks, you'd better get back to where you once belonged." Undeterred by Paltrul's vulgar remarks, Rinchen Targe made a highly respectful request for teachings on the Longchen Yingtig. Longchen Yingtig, repeated Paltrul thoughtfully. There's nothing about sodomizing young boys in that text. You'd better go someplace else. I don't think that I can be of any help to an insatiable pederast. Suddenly, before the monk could understand what was going on, he was being ushered out of the door. A splendid room was found for him, and he was left to his own devices. A room was also allocated to his attendants, who all slept together next to the kitchen. The whole party was very well treated, but although the Lama's room was grand, no heating was provided. The next day, Rinchen Targe presented himself to Paltrul with the same respectful request, but Paltrul dismissed him. My hiney's too old and baggy to raise your lust. You better try someplace else. I hear there's a new intake of young monks down a ways. Maybe if you get there quick enough, you'll get to them before the other monks bugger them senseless. And before Rinchen Targe was ushered out, and as before, Rinchen Targe was ushered out of the door before he really knew what was happening. His room awaited him. Now it must be said that the room assigned to him was a rather well-appointed apartment, the perfect room to offer to a visiting monastic lama, and the best room in the place. Every day, Rinchen Targe returned to the room and sat on his own. He spent his time in solitude, engaged in his practices and in his studies of the texts. Every day he presented himself to Paltrul, and every day Paltrul dismissed him with some snide remark. One day Paltrul would merely repeat that he was ignorant of buggery. The next day he'd say that he could be of no help to one of such great learning. Another day he'd say that his own buttocks were too hard and pockmarked from years of sitting in caves to give the monk a worthwhile erection. This went on for a month, and all the while the weather was getting more wintry. The monk was not used to living at the altitude of Dza Patrul and was evidently suffering. Nyurshul, feeling sorry for the monk, asked whether the poor man would ever be ready to receive Paltrul's teachings. Maybe, replied Paltrul in a lackadaisical style, but probably not today. Maybe tomorrow, maybe never. Rinchen Targe was walking sedately across the courtyard at the time, making his way to present himself to Paltrul. His robes were immaculately pleated, and his right arm was bare in spite of the bitter cold. He seems so sincere, Nyurshul reflected. Can you tell me what it is that's wrong with him? What is the obstacle that prevents him from receiving your teaching? Paltrul shook his head in disbelief on hearing this and said, well, Nyurshul, I'd have thought it was as plain as the nose on your face. Nyurshul looked but discovered little from what he saw. All he saw was a monk bearing up well under repeated disappointments, even though he was possibly becoming more miserable as the days wore on. However, he was as well turned out and elegant as the day he had arrived. Just check the details, Nyurshul, Paltrul repeated. Do you see a man who could leave appearances behind? Paltrul watched the monk as he walked with carefully measured tread towards Paltrul's door. When Rinchen Targe entered Paltrul's presence, he offered his prostrations and said, I am a well-disciplined monk. I keep monastic vows purely. I maintain the Bodhisattva vows, and I offer up merit to the realization of all sentient beings. I maintain my tantric oaths to Lama, Yidam, Kandro, and protectors. I have studied texts with diligence and do my best not to waste this precious human rebirth. I have complete trust in your realization and in the lineage, but I have been here for a month now, requesting teachings, and I'm still unworthy to take refuge in even a few words of your teaching. So now I must regretfully take my leave. I must depart in disgrace and return to my teacher without having fulfilled his instruction. Patrul looked at him severely, but detecting some change in the monk, did not have him ushered out. Rinchen Targe's speech was practically strangulated as he spoke. He was dejected, hopeless, and slightly frantic. You want to take refuge in a few words of teaching? Patrul inquired. Wouldn't you rather take refuge in the tight arse of a young monk? Rinchen Targe spluttered in total exasperation. But Rinpoche, this sodomy business has nothing to do with me. Patrul eyed him carefully and stated in slow, even tones. And your pretenses have nothing to do with me. Then quite unexpectedly, Patrul roared with laughter. Come back tomorrow, but come just as you are. If you come just as you are, I will give you a few words of teaching. Again, he was ushered out of the room and returned to his apartment. Rinchen Targe sat alone in his room, wondering what Patrul had meant. He was painfully cold, so cold that he had to give up turning the pages of his liturgical text. He wrapped his shawl around him, but the bitterness of the temperature was more than he could bear. He was reduced to shivering, tormented by Patrul's parting remarks. The words, "Come back tomorrow just as you are," flapped uselessly around his head. What could he do with such an injunction? Whatever he did, however he presented himself, it would be the same as before. Accusations of anal intercourse. But just as I am, he pondered. But what am I? That is not apparent. I'm a monk, but he knows that. What else can I be? How can it be that I am something that I do not even know about? This was impossible, totally impossible. How could he be just as he was when he was always just as he was? An hour passed, another hour, and suddenly something outlandishly preposterous occurred to him. I'm cold, he thought. I am cold. If that is not just who I am, then there's nothing else. I am cold. I am very damn cold. I'm going to freeze my butt off in this damn room. Rinchen Targe got up immediately and left his room. He went directly to the kitchen, the only place where he knew that some sort of warmth would be guaranteed. There were some of his monk attendants in the kitchen, drinking tea with the cook. He joined them. They were all most honored by his visit, and he joined them in their simple, good-humored conversation. The place where his monks' attendants slept had some warmth that came from the kitchen. There was a hearth where dried yak dung was burning. He inquired tentatively whether there was space to sleep there. The monks were most surprised, but were only too happy to have him join them there. He spent the day talking with them and keeping warm. His monks offered him some of their thicker clothing, but he declined to take it from them. Instead, he borrowed a woolen monastic jacket from the cook, a blackened, greasy affair. It was patched so much that it was practically shapeless, but it was warm. He slept the night with the monks in their room and slept so well that he was almost late for his appointment with Patrul. He was in such a hurry that he lashed his robes about his person in an unprecedentedly untidy fashion. He beat a hasty path to Patrul's door with his shawl wrapped tightly around him against the villainous chill factor of the wind that swept through the courtyard. His robe was a bit besmirched with soot from the fire, and he gave the appearance of a dishevelled monastic menial worker. He had no time to wash, eat breakfast, or present himself in anything close to a suitable manner. And in this embarrassing state, he threw himself to the ground in front of Patrul. "Welcome, welcome, dear fellow," Patrul greeted him. "Forget prostration. Sit, be comfortable, eat with us. You will have missed your breakfast, I'll be bound. A smoky room makes for heavy sleep." Poor Rinchen Targe had only managed one prostration. It simply crumpled onto the floor in a flood of tears. "Nyurshol," Patrul called, "help our good monk up. Make our venerable friend comfortable. Today we'll have a few words of teaching." It was a while before Rinchen Targe had composed himself, but when he did, they ate together as if he had just arrived as an honored guest. After a good breakfast, he sat with Nyurshol and a few other yogis and listened to Patrul's teaching. There was a joy and radiance emanating from him that was palpable. The change that had come over him was astonishing to Nyurshol. This was a different man. What had happened to the exalted, pietistic monk overnight? When the teaching was over, Patrul announced that he'd give the monk the entire cycle of transmission, teachings, and commentaries of the Longchen Yingtig. Rinchen Targe was overjoyed. He was just about to leave when Patrul called after him. "By the way, I hear there's no fire in your room. You must have been freezing in there. I will see to it that you have some heating." Rinchen Targe responded that there was no need because he had found a perfectly comfortable place to sleep. Nyurshol was amazed. "He's been there in all this cold without a fire." Patrul's face assumed a more serious demeanor, and he replied in a reverential tone, "Well, I'll be damned. Extraordinary, isn't it, Nyurshol? This is one exemplary monk." So then, having told the story, Khunsang Dorje Rinpoche would talk to Nakchang Rinpoche about the story, and Khunsang Dorje Rinpoche would ask him questions. I'm just missing a bit here, so excuse me while I get to the right place. So this is Rinpoche speaking. The story about Rinchen Targe made me feel quite sad. I found it very moving that this poor monk goes back to be insulted day after day for a month. That is really quite extreme. Not as extreme as the treatment of Milarepa, but extreme in terms of what happens these days. It seems quite an ordeal, and it saddens me when I consider honestly whether I would be able to do that. I feel that I would have given up. Rinpoche observed me for a moment, almost as if he were examining a wedge of cheese. No, you are not Tomyor like Rinchen Targe. Tomyor means idiot. No, you are not Tomyor like Rinchen Targe. Why would he come every day to hear such nonsense? This was a question and no mistake. Because, I ventured, he trusts in the Lama. Rinpoche interrupted me at this point. So you trust Kunzang Dorje? You ask for Dzogchen, and all I do is tell you stories. Do you trust that you will ever receive more than these stories? Here I had another immediate answer. It doesn't matter, Rinpoche, whether it's stories or Dzogchen teachings. It's more important for me to be here and spend this time with you. If you want to give me the Dzogchen teachings, you will. And if it doesn't work out like that, then I'm equally happy. The room was suddenly deadly quiet. Rinpoche had me riveted with his gaze. Yeah, so, never mind about Kunzang Dorje. Why is Paltrul so rude to people who come to see him? Do you think this is how a Lama should behave? Why does Paltrul spend a month baiting Rinchen Targe with insinuations of buggery and accusations that he desires the buttocks of young monks? I didn't have any answer as to how a Lama should behave, beyond the abstract concept of acting for the benefit of beings. And this was not the kind of answer to give Kunzang Dorje Rinpoche, unless I happened to be feeling suicidal. It seems that Dza Patrul has a very low opinion of monks in general. Is that true? No, this is just how he is in these stories. Patrul had great respect for monks in other stories. It just depends on the story. If Patrul was criticizing a Ngakpa, he would talk of him as a drunken, dirty lech who did nothing but look for girls. So, you say something more? A Lama can act in a variety of ways that would seem strange, repugnant, or reprehensible to an ordinary person. So there's nothing I can say about the actions of Patrul without trying to work out what was going on. This is the direction in which Rinpoche always took me in our discussions. He frequently insisted that it was utterly useless to approach these tales of enlightened activity either in a naive, credulous manner or with the simplistic religious moralism which reduces everything to platitudes or mystery. In view of this, I knew that answers like, Patrul is rude to people in order to destroy their pride, were alarmingly unwise. Answers such as these usually resulted in my being asked to leave or given such a horsewhipping in the form of a sneer or even simply one of those looks that I'd have some kind of emotional hemorrhage. I had to understand something. So what was there to understand? I pondered for quite a while, and fortunately Rinpoche seemed content to let me think about it without looking as if every second counted. I started looking at how the situation was resolved in terms of Patrul's underlying purpose with his daily references to pederasty. They were actually tedious after a while, and so Patrul must have wished to force something. Yes, I yelped suddenly. It could have gone on forever, but Rinchen Targe finally flipped, saying that fantasies about the buttocks of young monks had nothing to do with him. That allowed Patrul to say that Rinchen Targe's pretensions had nothing to do with him either. Up until then, Rinchen Targe was simply too proper even to deny anything. Rinpoche burst out laughing when he heard this answer. Oh, yeah, good answer. I did not think of this. A strange moment. I'd apparently got the right answer, or at least a right answer, but there was obviously another one. Should I ask about it, or should I sit it out? No, I should definitely not sit it out. That would be a Tom Yor tactic. I decided to take the plunge. What do you think about it, Rinpoche? He laughed and shook his head. Yeah, what does Kunzang Dorje Rinpoche think? Kunzang Dorje thinks many bad things. Maybe Paltrol just waits for the weather to get worse. Rinchen Tage has to give up, or he will freeze to death. He laughed. Yes, of course. It was simple. I often miss the straightforward understanding of these things, Rinpoche. That Paltrol was simply using the changing season in such a direct statement of dancing with situations. I wish I could see these things more easily. The right answer is so often just in front of my nose. Rinpoche shook his head vehemently. No, there is no right answer. My answer, your answer, it doesn't matter. The meaning I find is not better than the one you find. You must have more confidence in your own intelligence. Kunzang Dorje will not always be there to say, yes, this is the right answer. Maybe there are many meanings, and maybe none of them match Paltrol's mind. The important matter is principle and function. The vital point is that you know how to look for the principle and function of these stories. You are learning to see the principle and function in everything, and you know, without knowledge of the principle and function, Dzogchen Menakte is meaningless. I smiled when Rinpoche said, without knowledge of the principle and function, Dzogchen Menakte is meaningless. I knew as soon as I heard these words that he fully intended to give me the teachings I'd requested. Rinpoche also knew by my smile that I knew what he meant. On this occasion, there was no need to verify my perception. Looking back, I feel this was probably the wisest choice I ever made during our conversations.
Thank you very much indeed. That's a wonderful story.
I really like this story, even though it's a bit risque.
I think that really everyone involved is heroic in their own way. It interests me that Chogyam Lingpa had to send Rinchen Hage to another teacher in order for some breakthrough to occur. But I think in there's that tension because he's told he can't leave, he can't go back without the teaching. So that sets up one part of the tension.
Yeah, else he might have given up quicker.
He might well have given up. Yes. Yeah. And just the skillful means, you might say, that Paltrol used in order to take him to the edge.
I think it's also really interesting, the conversation at the end, that Kunzang Dorje says, your answer is as good as my answer. And it isn't that one answer is right. You saw that in the story. And I think we can all see our own meanings in these stories. I mean, this story very much reminds me of the slogan about practicing diligently but being natural. That who we are is the path of transformation. We just have to discover that quality of being who we are and not adopting some sort of Buddhist style or personality in order to gain realization. That's not going to work. We have to be what we are. What we are is the ground of our transformation. Yeah, so I love that story.
I think that's a most liberating view. Yeah. And the imagery from the story, I just find it always with me. I have this vision of Rinchen Tage hurrying along in mucky clothes that aren't put on properly, in the cold, possibly in the snow. It's just fantastic.
But that was appropriate in that context.
Yes.
It doesn't mean that it's appropriate to turn up like that in front of our teachers. We should turn up properly dressed and carefully dressed at other times. So that is the point of the principle and function.
Yes. Yeah.
It's the situation and knowing how to be natural but correct. It's that tension again.
In that way, it would be just as unnatural to dress in mucky clothes and turn up
that
disheveled.
Would be pretentious.
And that would be as pretentious to think, oh, well, it was all right for Rinchen Tage.
Okay, so don't